People before people, mysterious human species who once lived beside Homo sapiens. Chapter 1. How many walked the earth at the same time? Sometimes it feels as though the story of humanity is a single, a quiet path stretching from the deep past all the way to us, as if only one kind of sapience ever walked it. But if you narrow your eyes just a little, pause, take a slow breath, you'll notice that this path begins to blur, to soften, to split gently into many faint trails branching into different directions, a web of roads, a mesh of forgotten footsteps, a chorus of distant voices, as if someone once walked beside us. Always close, always near, and we simply never saw them. Not long ago, scientists believed that modern humans were the only true heirs of the ancient Homo lineage, the only ones who survived into the present. But the deeper archaeology digs into the earth, the more carefully genetics unravels the spirals of ancient DNA. The louder one soft truth keeps whispering through the silence: we were never alone. Not once. Tens of thousands of years ago, the earth was home to several kinds of humans at the same time. They lived in parallel worlds, sometimes crossing paths, sometimes drifting apart like shadows sliding across the stone walls of forgotten caves. Back then, the world was not empty at all. The northern winds brushed across the faces not only of our ancestors, but also of others, people who looked almost like us, yet carried something subtly different in their bones, in their habits, in the rhythm of their walk. People who feared different things at night, who watched the fire in their own way, who felt the world with slightly different senses. We imagine the Ice Age and see a clumsy Neanderthal, a figure we know well, almost too well. But standing right beside him were others, small hobbits from Flores, powerful Denisovans. Hidden groups that left almost nothing behind except faint genetic lines woven deep within us. There were hunters from the Siberian mountain ranges, people known only from a few fragments of ancient DNA. There were tiny, nocturnal folk of the southern forests, quiet, invisible, gone long before we ever learned their names. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear their footsteps. Multiple rhythms, multiple breaths, multiple stories. Some lived on remote islands, wrapped in ocean mist. Others wandered across endless tundra, a land they understood better than we ever will. Some climbed into mountains, so high their lives became legends of tribes that never show themselves in daylight. Others left behind only strange genetic signatures, gentle marks hidden in the depths of our cells. And all of them existed at once, on the same earth, in the same eras, parallel humanities. What's most surprising is that they were not early versions of us. They were true human species with their own fears, their own cultures, their own ways of surviving the dark. They looked at the sky, the animals, the fire, and perhaps thought different thoughts than we do. They heard the night differently. They felt darkness differently. They read tracks in sand in ways we might never understand. The world was far more diverse than our modern minds like to imagine. And now, tens of thousands of years later, we suddenly feel as if someone is walking behind us. Not threatening, not frightening, just a reminder. Chapter 1, How many of us walked the earth at once sometimes. It feels as though the history of humanity is a single straight path. As if one species, one version of Homo sapiens, gently walked it alone, but if you soften your gaze, if you pause for a moment and breathe slowly, this path begins to blur and widen, dissolving into dozens of faint trails branching in different directions. As if someone had always walked beside us. For a long time, scientists believed that modern humans were the only true heirs of the ancient Homo lineage, the only ones who reached the present. The clearer one gentle truth becomes, we were never alone. No hiver. Tens of thousands of years ago, the Earth was home to several kinds of humans at the same time. The northern winds brushed not only the faces of our ancestors, but also the faces of others, people who looked almost like us, but were just a little different. Different skulls, different habits, a slightly different rhythm of walking. Different fears that whispered to them at night, and different ways of watching the fire. A figure we know well enough to picture. Small hobbit-like people from the island of Flores. Shadowy populations who left almost nothing behind except faint lines in the human genome. Known only from several fragments of ancient DNA, there were tiny, night-dwelling peoples in the southern forests, silent, unnoticed, gone long before we learned their names. If you close your eyes and listen carefully, you can almost hear the footsteps, several rhythms, several patterns of breathing, several stories moving side by side. Some lived on islands, hidden by the ocean, knowing it better than we can even imagine. Some climbed into mountains and became the source of legends. Others left behind only strange genetic markers, quiet signatures buried deep within our cells. All of this existed at the same time on one Earth, in the Samira parallel humans living parallel lives. They were not earlier drafts of us. They were true species of humans with their own cultures, their own fears, their own ways of surviving. They might have looked at the sky and understood it differently. They might have heard night sounds in a way that we never could. They might have followed animal tracks with instincts that have long faded. The world was richer than our modern mind is ready to accept. And now, tens of thousands of years later, not threatening, not frightening, just a gentle reminder, before us there were others, beside us there were others, and a part of them still walks with us, inside our DNA. This is a story about them, the people before people. Those who lived beside us disappeared and left behind a quiet trace on the earth. Species whose names we learned only recently, yet who may once have looked at the sunrise and thought, here it is. A new day, Chapter 2, the echo of ancestors, how genetics revealed hidden human lineages once. Everything we knew about ancient people came from the earth itself, from bones, sand, and chipped stone tools. Archaeologists spent long months in the field, sometimes uncovering nothing more than a single tooth. And from that fragile clue, they tried to see who that person was, how they lived, how they held their spear. And then came the surprises. In 2010, scientists sequenced DNA from a tiny finger, bone. Further study showed traces of other lineages, shadows of people we never found in the ground. Yet their genes remain inside us. We met others. Like soft rings of time pressed gently one atop another, deeper than the steps of early Homo sapiens. The first hint, the first delicate shadow of another humanity. But Denisovans did not belong to this cave alone. There, genetic echoes stretch far, from the cold winds of southern Siberia to the dark, humid rainforests of Southeast Asia. Perhaps they climbed the thin air of the Tibetan mountains. Perhaps they crossed the wide, whispering steppes of Mongolia. They could live in the silence of the taiga or among stone canyons where the wind hums through narrow passages. Their adaptability was astonishing, almost otherworldly. They survived cruel winters. But the traces in modern DNA tell us they also lived in warm, wet forests, where the world buzzes with insects and life never sleeps. Denisovans, a mist-like people, a wandering presence not bound to one land, one climate, or one way of life. They dissolved into landscapes, blended into mountains and forests like shadows that leave only the faintest marks behind. And in that silent subtlety lies their mystery. The absence of large, permanent settlements doesn't mean they were primitive. It means they lived in small bands, moving across enormous territories, leaving only soft traces, a stone, a hearth, a tooth, tiny signals of long journeys. What did they look like? Genetic reconstructions whisper they were strong, powerfully built, with wide faces and sturdy bodies. Their features may have been bold, perhaps even harsh, but that is only one possibility. They were genetically diverse. Just as modern humans vary from region to region in height, build, and face. One curious thing we know almost for certain: their teeth, especially the molars, were unusually large, bigger than Neanderthals. A puzzle. Did they chew tougher food? Did they rely on nuts, roots, fibrous plants? Or was it simply an ancient trait that lingered in them longer than in others? We don't yet know. But if you imagine a Denisovan standing among the stones of the Altai, a powerful silhouette, hands short but immensely strong, a face with broad cheekbones warmed by the firelight, you feel a sense of stability, of quiet confidence. These were people who understood the cold, who could spark fire in howling wind, who shaped their lives around changing climates with a calm, instinctive wisdom. Where did they live? The Altai and Siberia were their first discovered home. Here, winters are long and merciless. Temperatures drop far below freezing, snow crunches underfoot like powdered stone, and winds sing sharply through the pines. Yet, Denisovans lived here for thousands of years. This means their survival culture was incredibly advanced, even without large settlements or heavy structures. Their shelters may have been temporary, made of skins and branches, simple frameworks that blended into the land and disappeared with time. But they also lived in warmer worlds, worlds of rain and green breath. Genetic traces in modern peoples of Southeast Asia hint at Denisovans walking through steaming jungles beneath tangled canopies, where life beats loudly on all sides. Different climates, different landscapes, yet one mysterious people moving through all of them, leaving only a whisper behind. Here, in these warm and shadowed lands, their adaptability revealed itself in a different way, in the flexibility of their diet, in hunting strategies shaped by dense foliage and shifting sounds. Under the layered canopies of tropical trees, they could become almost invisible. Silent figures moving through green twilight, and then the Tibetan heights. Life where the air thins, where each breath becomes a quiet effort. One of the most mysterious clues we have today is the high-altitude adaptation found in modern Tibetans a trait tied directly to ancient Denisovan genes. This means someone lived in those mountains long before Homo sapiens arrived. Someone who walked where the clouds brush against the earth, where winds carve the stone, where night freezes the world in minutes. Someone who may have been among the world's first true highlanders. It paints a nearly mythical image. In the mist of Tibetan valleys among cold mountain passes, small groups of Denisovans might have wandered, unseen, quiet, perfectly attuned to the harsh rhythm of the heights. Their way of life. Nomads of the Stone Age, they left behind few tools, yet the ones we do find whisper of skill. They shaped blade-like stones, worked with bone, hunted large mammals, gathered roots, and cooked their food over fire that cracked softly in the dark. Their culture feels dissolved, as if their lifestyle was not built on the landscape, but woven into it. They did not raise cities. They were part of the wilderness. They did not leave carved statues, yet knowledge may have been passed from hand to hand, from elder to child, by movement, by memory, by flame-lit stories that vanished with the rising dawn, their disappearance. Not a tragedy, but a gentle fading. Most likely, Denisovans slowly yielded space to the expanding populations of Homo sapiens, a species more numerous, more flexible, spreading winter seeds, but their end was not sharp or sudden. It felt like fog lifting from a valley, softly, quietly, almost imperceptibly. They simply blended into the future, leaving fragments of themselves inside the bodies of generations yet to come. Even now, we carry the memory of this mysterious people in our cells. Traces of those who lived in mountains, in forests, in tundras. Traces of those we will never meet, yet whose ancient gifts help us survive. Chapter 5. The Hobbits of Flores, the people the size of a child, yet belonging to their own branch of humanity, ***, when the first remains of these tiny humans were found on Flores Island. Many scientists believed at first that it must be a mistake. In their hands was a remarkably small human skull, roughly the size of a grapefruit, yet it belonged to an adult. A tiny jaw, delicate teeth, almost childlike. A height of barely 1 meter. Strange hands, unusual proportions of the legs, anatomy unlike anything seen before. This was not a child. And not a dwarf form of Homo sapiens. It was a Floresiensis. As if nature had decided to hide a separate chapter of human history, not on vast continents, but on a secluded tropical island, surrounded by water, jungles, and ancient volcanoes. Flores is a place that feels almost mythological. Deep caves, shadowed ravines, regions where twilight lingers longer than it should. In such places one can easily imagine small human beings hunting at night, slipping quietly through the undergrowth, avoiding large predators with instinctive grace. And this image is not fantasy. It is likely how the hobbits of Flores truly lived. Homo floresiensis possessed incredibly unusual anatomy. Their brain was almost 3 times smaller than ours. And yet, they crafted stone tools, sharp, precise blades, small axes shaped with surprising care. It is astonishing. A Tinibrin, but developed technoculture, still argue about how this was possible. What kind of intelligence did they have? Was their brain built differently, perhaps more efficient in ways we do not yet understand? Some elements of their skeleton seem to whisper of something ancient, as if this species had preserved traits from the very early branches of the Homo family tree, features that vanished in everyone else. It is almost as if they separated from our shared lineage long ago, long before Neanderthals, and evolved quietly, in parallel, on their own forgotten timeline. On an isolated island, cut away from the continents, they followed a path shaped only by local winds and the pulse of the forest, their own small rhythm of evolution. The island of Flores itself was a world apart. Here lived dwarf elephants, the stegodons, giant varan lizards, and enormous rats that skittered through the underbrush. A strange combination of creatures, creating a unique ecological niche. Small humans could hunt small elephants, leaving behind cracked bones pierced by stone tools. They could defend themselves from great monitor lizards, hiding in caves where shadows clung to the walls like smoke, and those giant rats. Perhaps they were prey, perhaps a source of food at night, or perhaps noisy neighbors rustling in the darkness beside them. But the most important detail is this: their tiny stature was not an illness, it was an adaptation. On isolated islands, a quiet rule of nature begins to work, the rule of island dwarfism. Large species become smaller. Small ones grow larger. Resources are limited, predators few, and evolution reshapes bodies like clay. Flores is one of nature's clearest examples, and Homo floresiensis became its most striking proof. What did their faces look like? Reconstructions show gentle, friendly features, high cheekbones, wide eyes, a short, soft nose. Faces that, in the dim breath of the cave, would have looked round and doll-like. And yet their bodies were strong. Powerful forearms, massive feet, a gait that was not quite human, a slight sway, a grounded heaviness in each step. When archaeologists explored the Liang Bua cave, they found thick layers of habitation. Not a temporary shelter, but a home lived in for thousands of years. Layer upon layer, generation after generation, the little hobbits expanded their life across the island. Their disappearance dates to around 50 to 60,000 years ago, a curious number, because at that very time, the first Homo sapiens were arriving in Southeast Asian islands. Scientists debate, did the hobbits vanish because of contact with our ancestors? Or did climate shift? Did volcanic eruptions bury their world in ash? Or did they simply fade, as small populations often do, a few missing generations, and the trail dissolves into silence? And yet, the island holds memories. On Flores, ancient legends still speak of tiny people, the Ebugogo, stories so old that no one remembers where they began. Maybe they describe small tribes that once lived there. Or maybe, just maybe, they are echoes of those very hobbits themselves. Scientists are cautious, but island mythology is often older than history, older than memory possible. That Homo floresiensis and Homo sapiens once saw each other. Perhaps they shared the land for a time. Perhaps people told stories about them beside a nighttime fire. Stories that survived thousands of years, softened and reshaped, yet carrying the faint outline of truth. And if you close your eyes and imagine Flores 60,000 years ago, the picture becomes dreamlike, a warm island breathing in slow waves, a world that seems to drift gently into sleep. Evening, mist drifting over tropical trees, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant growl of a monitor lizard, and at the entrance of a cave, a small figure, the height of a child, yet fully grown. She kneels beside a tiny fire, coaxing it to life. Her movements are swift, precise, almost instinctive. She does not feel small. For her, the world has always been built on a different scale. A quieter scale, a closer one. And somewhere far away, across oceans and continents, in those very same centuries, other humans lived their own stories, the Denisovans, the Neanderthals, the early Homo sapiens. Butzef locked around in that path. There is a soft, whispering wisdom. The world of humans was never uniform. Even a tiny body could hold a complete human spirit, just a spirit of another kind. Chapter 6. The Luzon people, the small hunters of the Philippine caves, ***, if the island of Flores gave us hobbits. Then another island, Luzon, in the heart of the Philippines, revealed a mystery of its own. In 29, saya discovered these are more Luzonosi, people of small stature, with strange, unexpected anatomy, as if shaped by an evolutionary branch, we somehow overlooked for hundreds of thousands of years. Their bones were hidden deep inside Callao Cave, dark, humid, sealed away from sunlight. A place where footsteps dissolve almost instantly, swallowed by the stone walls as if the cave itself is listening. Luzon is a huge island, surrounded by restless seas, mountain ranges, and dense tropical forests. Here, everything feels too alive. Birds cry louder, the leaves grow thicker, the air itself seems heavier, almost sweet. And within this vibrant, wild world, thousands of years ago, lived humans whose existence was completely unknown to us until now. No legends about them survived. No myths, no whispers, not even a fading echo, only bones. And a quiet intuition that we once lived side by side, yet never truly met. The remains found in Callao Cave were fragmentary, a few teeth, finger bones, toe bones, part of a femur. And yet, even this was enough to understand. These were not Homo sapiens, not Neanderthals, not even the hobbits of Flores. They were something else. A separate branch. A path with its own rhythm, its own silhouette, its own way of being human. What makes Homo luzonensis so special? Their bodies were like a mosaic, a gentle blend of ancient and more modern traits. Some features resembled Homo habilis or the earliest Homo erectus. Others looked surprisingly advanced. Their teeth were tiny, delicate, compact, smaller than in most early human species. A sign of evolutionary sophistication, but their finger bones were curved, like those of much older humans who still climbed trees with ease. Some bones of the feet also echoed these ancient shapes, as if these people had not fully transitioned to our style of walking. Their size, judging by the bones, was very small, likely similar to the Flores hobbits. It all feels as if evolution on Luzon followed its own rules, unlike anything on the mainland. On islands, the laws change, time slows. Small populations preserve ancient traits, if those traits help them survive. How did they reach Luzon? This is one of the great mysteries. The island has no easy path from the mainland. Today it is surrounded by deep seas, and even during the ice ages, when sea levels were far lower, no land bridge appeared, which means someone crossed the water or drifted there by accident on a natural raft of fallen trees, carried by storms into the open ocean. The fact that they lived on Luzon 50,000 to 70,000 years ago, and perhaps much earlier, suggests that ancient humans were navigating water far more often than we once believed. Bit by bit, the world of early humans becomes less primitive, less more primitive. Life in Kiao Cave and beyond the cave, where their bones were found, feels almost designed for a hidden people. It is cool, dark, moist. The entrance is narrow, but deeper. Inside, the chamber opens gently, like a shelter from heat, storms, predators, and time itself. Imagine the dim blue twilight of a tropical evening. Cicadas cry sharply, their voices trembling through the trees. Rain glistens on the leaves. And a small human, barely a meter tall, returns from a long hunt. Over one shoulder, a tiny animal hangs, perhaps a pygmy deer, once common on Luzon. In one hand, a stone tool, thin, sharp, worn smooth by use. He moves quickly, quietly, with the soft confidence of a forest creature, yet with a mind that is unmistakably human. A mind shaped by a world we are only beginning to rediscover. His eyes were shaped by the darkness. His hearing, sharp, alert, always listening. The forest was full of danger, and at night those dangers multiplied. They likely lived in small groups, 10, maybe 20 people, families, wandering clans of hunters. Their language is lost, their culture faded away like a sound, swallowed by the depths of the tropical forest. And yet, they were human in their own quiet way, with their fears, their habits, their small rituals, and perhaps stories whispered beside a fire on long, warm nights. Their disappearance is another unresolved riddle. Homo luzonensis vanished around the same time as the hobbits of Flores, close to the arrival of Homo sapiens in the region. But no signs of direct contact were ever found. And that opens the door to many quiet possibilities, competition for food, even without conflict. The slow fading of a tiny population, climate shifts, waves of disease, or simply the fragile mathematics of survival. But perhaps the most intriguing part is this: like the Flores hobbits, these small people lived unbelievably close to the migration routes of the last Neanderthals and the first modern humans. One can imagine, somewhere deep in the forest, a traveler catching a glimpse of a small silhouette among the branches and never understanding who or what it was. There, traces are more important than they might seem. We still don't have their DNA, the bones have not revealed it yet. But their mere existence whispers a larger truth. Asia was once home to many kinds of humans, different in appearance, different in movement, different in how they survived the world. They were part of a vast, silent mosaic of humanity that vanished quietly, gently. And now, all we have left is a thought. Once, the world was full of different people, and all of them look at us now as if from behind a tall wall of time. Chapter 7. Night Hunters of Northern Eurasia. Rare strands of DNA from the frozen world. Imagine the Earth 30 to 40,000 years ago. Eurasia becomes a gigantic, almost silent space, tundras, endless steppes, dark coniferous forests, all wrapped in freezing winds, ice, and unending twilight. In such a world, a human could not survive without hearing every rustle, without feeling the direction of the wind, without knowing the tracks and secrets of animals as intimately as their own heartbeat. Now, imagine, these lands were not walked only by Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. There were others, hunters whose faces we will never see. whose bones remain missing or unrecognized, but whose genetic shadow stretches across time like a thin thread in the dark. They are called, for now, ancient North Eurasians. But this name is not the whole truth. They were not a tribe, not a culture, but a mysterious human population that lived beside our ancestors, yet whose origins and destiny remain wrapped in cold mist. There, traces were found not in caves, not on tools carved from stone, but deep within human DNA, especially among indigenous Siberian peoples, some Native American groups, and ancient populations of the East European steppe. Then, suddenly it became clear, when Homo sapiens arrived in Eurasia. There were already other humans living there, not Denisovans, not Neanderthals, but something third. Not a separate species, but an ancient branch of Homo sapiens that split off early and lived differently from our direct ancestors. No one can say for sure. Almost everything we know about them comes from the reconstructed genome of a boy from Malta, MA1, found in Siberia, who lived about 24,000 years ago. But the lineage he came from runs far deeper. It seems he was not an exception, but one of the last members of a vast and once widespread population. Geneticists see that the ancient North Eurasians split from our lineage very early, perhaps around 45 to 50,000 years ago, right after humans left Africa. This means Eurasia held at least two very different kinds of Homo sapiens living side by side. They may have looked different, spoken differently, lived by different traditions. But all of that is forever lost. Why are they called night hunters? The name is symbolic, but strangely fitting. Genetics has no poetry, but nature always does. When scientists reconstruct the climate of that time, they see a world of long twilight, short days, and cold nights. A world where hunting often happened on snow-covered ground, beneath icy winds, under the half-light of a sun that barely rose above the horizon. Such conditions demanded special skills from a human, above all, silent movement and the ability to remain unseen. That's why their image isn't that of a bright, noticeable tribe with large settlements, but rather of wandering hunters who moved quickly, changed camps often, and followed the great herds of mammoths, reindeer, and wild horses. They left few traces, as if they didn't want to be found, or as if their footprints were simply swallowed by the eternal frost. What do we know about them through genetics? The ancient North Eurasians contributed part of their genes to the indigenous peoples of Siberia, to ancient hunters of Eastern Europe, to the ancestors of Native Americans of both North and South America, and even to some steppe populations of the Bronze Age. This means they were a bridge between East and West. Their blood flowed in the veins of the people who later crossed Beringer and settled the Americas. They stood at the very beginning of an entirely new branch of human history. But even more fascinating is this: their genetic line resembles no other. It is unrelated to Neanderthals, distinct from Denisovans, and not similar to early European Homo sapiens. It sounds almost mystical, as if we are looking at an ancient tribe that fits somewhere into our evolutionary tree, but doesn't fully follow its known paths. As though it came from a hidden hallway in the house of human history. What did they look like? There is no definitive answer, but reconstruction's strong studiebild adapt to call something in between. Possibly light-colored eyes. Some genetic markers hint at that. faces combining features of both Western and Eastern human groups. They may have been the kind of people modern observers would describe as northern, quiet, enduring, resilient. This impression is strengthened by the fact that the climate they lived in was harsh even by Ice Age standards. How did they disappear? Their fading was gradual. Some of their populations were absorbed into early Homo sapiens who arrived later. Others followed migrating animals eastward, crossing Beringer. Their descendants became part of the deep genetic foundation of the first peoples of the New World. The last groups who remained in Eurasia eventually yielded to newer waves of sapiens, humans with more advanced tools, larger numbers, and a more developed culture of exchange. Yet, the genetic shadow of these night hunters still lingers in those whose ancestors lived in the far north. A quiet but ancient echo, like the faint smell of smoke from a distant campfire that reshapes the air around you, even when the fire itself has long gone out. Why is this lineage so important? Because it shows that even within Homo sapiens, there existed diversity almost as great as the difference between separate species. Humanity was never a single line, it was layered, braided, full of branching paths. Und when we're så human left, we're auch talking about to many separate waves, each carrying its own lifestyle, its own traditions, its own look. The ancient North Eurasians were one of those lost streams, people who walked the night plains, looked up at the northern sky, and hunted beneath the dim winter light. Their footsteps have vanished, but their genes still walk beside us. Chapter 8, Inside the Polar Darkness. Who lived in the tundra before our ancestors arrived. Asterisk, asterisk, when we say tundra, the imagination paints emptiness, snowy plains, low shrubs, long shadows, the northern wind. It feels too harsh, too barren to be a home for humans, but this is how we see it today. Tens of thousands of years ago, the tundra was different, wide, alive, thriving, full of mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, reindeer. And in this enormous polar world lived people we know astonishingly little about. They are called by many names: ancient Arctic hunters, northern paleopeoples, pre-Siberian populations. But most often is the chapter our main source of knowledge, but here the puzzle is even harder. Bones are almost non-existent. Organic remains in the tundra break down quickly. Permafrost preserves animal fossils, but human remains are rare and usually in poor condition. Yet geneticists have found traces of another mysterious group, not Denisovans, not early sapiens, and not the ancient North Eurasians. People who inhabited the northernmost stripe of the planet long before anyone else dared to live there. Where did they live? Around 40 to 30,000 years ago, the north of Eurasia was a wide belt of open tundra steppe, the so-called Mammoth Landscape. Summer was short, but rich with life. Vast open spaces were covered in grass, and thousands of animals came out to graze. Winter, however, was long but dry. The snow lay shallow, the wind steady, far less savage than it is today. It was a perfect land for hunting, for moving, for migration. Imagine an endless line of horizon. Silence broken only by the distant thunder of hooves. And among this motionless beauty walked small, tightly bonded groups of people. There, fires could be seen from afar at night, but the groups themselves were tiny, 5, 10, 15 individuals, family clans, wandering camps. They moved across a land that in winter transformed into a world of blue light, and in summer into water and soft grass. Who were they by origin? The most astonishing thing is this: their genetic code fully matches none of the ancient human lineages we know. They seem to occupy an intermediate place between early Homo sapiens who came north, the ancient North Eurasians from the previous chapter, and very early, still African branches of our species. This means the tundra was inhabited not by a single population, but by several. Some of these groups may have been extremely ancient, splitting off from the main Homo sapiens trunk somewhere in Asia, then moving far into the north. Others arrived later, carried by later waves of migration. Yet, these populations did not disappear immediately. They lived side by side, sometimes met, sometimes mixed, but kept their own cultural traits. What did they look like? This is one of the greatest mysteries. The bones we have are insufficient, just a couple of skull fragments loosely associated with northern lineages. So their appearance must be reconstructed cautiously. Perhaps they had dense, powerful bodies adapted to the cold, with shorter limbs to retain heat. Facial features unlike any modern European or modern Asian type. Skin and hair adapted to low sunlight. Some reconstructions suggest they may have been lighter than today's Asian peoples, but darker than early Europeans. But these are only guesses. Genetic markers provide only a general direction, never a portrait. What was their life like? Imagine the long polar night. The stars hang low, the sky perfectly clear. In the freezing air, your breath becomes a cloud of steam. Somewhere, far away, you hear the crunch of ice, a mammoth herd moving toward its winter pasture. And in this nocturnal landscape stands a small human camp, light shelters made of hides, so as not to attract predators. The air smells of dried meat. They hunted large animals, but not only them. The tundra gave many resources: roots and tubers in summer, fish from rivers and lakes, bird eggs, bones and antlers for tools, fur for clothing, fat, more valuable than gold, a source of heat and life. Their tools were simple but effective: long spears with flint points, bone harpoons, stone knives. They knew how to keep warmth, how to hide from the wind, how to read tracks on snow as if they were lines of a familiar script. Why did they disappear? Because the tundra is a world where populations are always small. Any change, a shift in climate, a disease, a river drying out, a migration of animals, and a group might vanish in a generation or two. When Homo sapiens spread wider and deeper from the southern regions, they brought not only numbers but new technologies, complex harpoons, nets, traps, and social rituals of exchange. Northern populations slowly dissolved into these larger waves of newcomers. And yet, their traces remain in modern people, especially among indigenous Siberians, who still carry markers of these ancient lines. Genetic echoes of the darkness, as if the northern hunters still walk beside us, only long silent. Why is this story important? Because it shows that humans did not conquer the North once, but many times. Before our ancestors came, there were already those who knew how to live in the eternal night, how to hear an animal's movement from kilometers away, how to understand snow. These unknown people were part of the landscape, like reindeer, like mammoths, like wind. Their disappearance is not a tragedy, but a gentle blending of one human line into another. There is something dreamlike, calm. almost sleepy in it, as if the tundra itself keeps the memory of those who walked through polar darkness, leaving footprints that vanished in the wind. Chapter 9. Phantom Clans, Genetic Lineages that Belong to No Known Species ****. If archaeology is the world of bones and stone, genetics is the world of shadows. Where the earth stays silent, DNA sometimes whispers. And among those whispers are things that look more like riddles than knowledge. As we already said, scientists call them ghost lineages, phantom paths of human evolution. These are the traces of peoples we have never seen. No skulls, no finger bones, no composite, no tools, only tiny fragments of heredity in the genes of modern humans, pieces of code unlike Homo sapiens, unlike Neanderthals, unlike Denisovans. They are shimmering silhouettes on the horizon, visible only under a certain angle of light. We know these people existed, yet we cannot say what they looked like, how they lived, or why they vanished. They are a humanity without faces. And the strangest part is this: there were many of them. How do we know about these phantom lineages? The answer begins in Africa. It was there that geneticists first detected pieces of DNA that could not be present if our evolutionary history had been simple. These fragments were too ancient, too distinct. Their origin stretched back millions of years. This gave rise to the first suspicion that unknown ancient humans lived in Africa, interbreeding with early Homo sapiens. Later, similar anomalous DNA fragments were found in West African populations, then in East African ones, then in several groups from Central Africa. A pattern emerged. Africa was not the cradle of a single species, but a vast continent of parallel humanities, many of which vanished, leaving nothing but a few % of their genomes inside us. But that was only the beginning. When geneticists began studying ancient DNA outside the continent, neither to Denisovans nor Neanderthals. Melanesians possess stretches of DNA that match no known lineage, as if they belong to an entirely different human species that once lived somewhere in Southeast Asia. Some ancient European populations It opens, but beyond it lies mist. We see the outline, but not the figure. What might these ghosts have been? Each sounding almost like the plot of an old myth. Some ghost fragments may come from extremely old human populations that never left Africa and lived alongside early Homo sapiens. This would mean the continent was not just the birthplace of our species. Between many branches of humanity, 2 small island species in Asia unknown to archaeology. That in the islands of Indonesia and the Philippines, for which we have not yet found a single bone. The tropics destroy skeletal remains quickly. Three groups that mixed with sapiens even before leaving Africa. not long before Homo sapiens migrated into Eurasia. We're not a single people, but a constellation of lineages. Some may have been so different that genetically because they change our understanding. Neanderthals. We get a web of crossings. It is as if the world of ancient humans sometimes vanishing without a trace. Humanity has always been a community. And still, who were they? This chapter is almost an acknowledgement of our ignorance, but there is something soothing in it. Perhaps humanity has always been wider than we imagine, richer, more numerous, more diverse. And now, when we look into the past, we see not one evolutionary trunk, but an entire forest. Some trees still stand. Others fell long ago, but their roots remain intertwined with ours. These ghosts are more than genetic anomalies. They are a reminder. We are not the descendants of a single people, but of many forgotten humanities. Chapter 10. When Homo sapiens met the others interspecies encounters, if you imagine a map of the ancient world. The migrations of humans begin to look like long, slow waves rolling across continents. One group drifts northward, another moves east. A third follows the coastlines like wandering tides. And wherever they traveled, sooner or later something happened, something impossible to trace in stone tools, yet forever preserved in our genome. The meetings of different human species. Today, we know that when Homo sapiens left Africa, they did not walk into an empty world. On their path lived Neanderthals. Strong, resilient, beautifully adapted to the cold. Denisovans, the elusive people of the mountains, of taiga, forests and humid Asian tropics. The peoples of Flores and Luzon, island species with ancient traits. And beyond them, populations we know only from DNA, humans whose bones we have never found, but whose genetic shadows still follow us. These meetings were not wars, not invasions. They were quiet, rare, accidental, like to travelers crossing at a riverbank or meeting by chance on a hunting trail. Yet, each such encounter could reshape the destiny of generations to come. The first contact, distrust and curiosity, it is difficult to imagine what a young Homo sapiens felt when he first saw a Neanderthal. Before him stood a person different, and yet undeniably human. A strong body, a broad, reflective gaze, and, most importantly, no hostility. Today, we know Neanderthals were not violent by nature. Their lives were built around small, tightly bonded groups where aggression harmed more than it helped. Perhaps the first meeting was brief, cautious glances, slow gestures, an attempt to understand intentions without words, without shared language. Only intuition. Many anthropologists believe that first interspecies encounters did not happen during hunts, but near water sources or around campsites, places where humans slowed down, relaxed, and became open to signals carried by silence. Shared camps and the exchange of skills if Homo sapiens and Neanderthals lived side by side, even briefly. It inevitably led to an exchange of knowledge, methods of shaping flint, styles of crafting spear points, hunting strategies, ways of reading the land. Even when language fails, hands can teach. Rhythms of work can be copied. A gesture can be a lesson. In some archaeological layers, tools of sapiens and Neanderthals lie mixed together. This is not definitive proof of shared living, but it is a strong whisper, a suggestion, a shadow of proximity. The contact was not a moment, it was a stretch of time, a slow blending of worlds. Night, rituals, and ancient fears imagine a world where darkness falls quickly and the fire's faint glow is your only shelter from the vast, breathing night. In such silence, different human species could feel each other. This isn't fantasy. Even modern hunters speak of such awareness. You hear footsteps, breathing, the whisper of wind over snow, and somewhere beyond the circle of firelight might be Ote humain. Some scholars think that certain species had more developed night sensitivity than Homo sapiens, especially the Denisovans, who lived in mountain forests and deep valleys. They may have moved with a smoother gait, with softer steps, with an uncanny sense for twilight. When sapiens met such people, the impression must have been overwhelming, a mixture of awe and quiet fear, not fear of a predator. Fear of the unknown. Fear of someone like you, but not quite you. Interbreeding, rare, but transformative. Today we know that interspecies mating was not as common as once believed. These were rare moments, isolated sparks scattered across millennia, but their impact was enormous. All humans outside Africa carry Neanderthal DNA. Melanesians carry up to 5% Denisovan ancestry. Tibetans have a Denisovan variant of EPAS1, a genetic key to surviving in thin, high-altitude air. Some immunity traits in sapiens are gifts from vanished peoples. These encounters were not waves, they were droplets. But droplets that changed the sea. Shared hunts and parallel migrations. There is a beautiful scientific hypothesis that in some regions, for a while, different human species lived in parallel without displacing each other. In the Altai Mountains, Denisovans, Neanderthals, and sapiens all lived in the same cave, although at different times, like travelers using the same shelter across centuries. In the Near East, sapiens and Neanderthals coexisted for 5,000 to 7,000 years. These were not battles, not campaigns. It was a slow crossing of territories, like two herds whose paths overlap, from time to time, but mostly drift apart. Why the contacts ended? Because the species themselves faded away. Neanderthals and Denisovans did not disappear through conquest, but through the fragility of small populations. Climate shifts, scattered groups shrinking over generations. Their story was not one of defeat, but of quiet extinction, a soft dimming of a great fire. Homo sapiens, more numerous, flexible, and communicative, unintentionally occupied the space where other species proved too fragile. Yet their traces remained within us, in our cells, in our immunity, in our adaptations, and perhaps in a deep, quiet sense that once, on Earth, lived others, not beasts, not myths. People, but not like us. Chapter 11. Other languages. Could the ancient species speak differently? When we think of ancient humans, we picture gestures, fire, hunting, camps. But we rarely think about how they sounded, what their voices were like, what words they used. Could a Neanderthal sing? Could a Denisovan whisper? Could the Flores people call to each other across distance? The questions feel almost mystical, and therefore perfect for a sleepy night lecture where reality gently blends with scientific hypotheses. Today, we know that the ability to speak was not unique to Homo sapiens. More and more research suggests that our vanished relatives could speak, and perhaps spoke no worse than we do. Only differently. What did a Neanderthal's voice sound like? Neanderthals had almost the same throat structure as we do. Their hyoid bone, essential for articulation, is shaped like ours. Their ribcage allowed fine control over breath. Their ears were tuned to the frequency range typical for speech. This means Neanderthals could speak, but how did they sound? Some reconstructions suggest their voice was slightly lower and more muffled, due to the massive skull and wide nasal passages. Their speech may have been slower, more mesured, with elongated. In the half-dark of a cave, such a voice would sound like a warm, rasping bass, calm and steady. Sleepy science lets us imagine it. Long, drawn-out stories Neanderthal nates slow daar hituel sound. Language is not only words, it is rhythm, repetition, intonation. And how did the Denisovans speak? The Denisovans left no skulls, no hyoid bones, only genes. But genetics tells surprisingly much. In their DNA, there are variations of FOXP2, the same language gene associated in Homo sapiens with learning speech. This suggests Denisovans could speak too, but with what voices? Imagine them in the Alti Mountains, strong, broad-faced, large-toothed people. Their speech may have been low, with a resonant chest timbre, quiet, restrained, economical with words, where pauses mattered. Imagine a twilight forest, cold mountain air, and a voice speaking short phrases meaningful only within its own tribe. But imagine Denisovans in the tropics of Southeast Asia, where humidity is high, and sounds dissolve in the foliage. Their language could have been entirely different, brighter, more melodic, adapted to a noisy environment. The same people in different climates could have developed different linguistic cultures. The Flores and Luzon people, conversations in tropical darkness. The tiny Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis had unusual skull structures. The Flores people had small brains, but the shape of the skull suggests preserved structures for sound processing. They could produce various, fairly complex vocal signals. Was it true speech? We don't know. But it may have been short clicks, quick sounds, modulated hisses, melodic signals for communication in dense vegetation. In the dark, tropical forests, such sounds are perfect. They travel quickly, remain distinct among the leaves, and don't scare prey. We can imagine the tiny hunters, less than a meter tall, calling to each other between trees with short, bird-like sounds. No mysticism, just adaptation. And at the same time, it gives a tangible sense of a world that was like ours, yet sounded different. There are many levels of understanding. Modern hunter-gatherers often use minimal speech during hunts. Signals matter more than sound. The Denisovan songs by a mountain stream, the Flores' morning calls. And in that silence there is a kind of peace. The world was larger than what we are able to hear, richer. Today we have inherited only an echo. The mystery of disappearance. They walked the same lands, lit fires by the same rivers, gazed at the same starry skies. Their end was not a drama, but a gradual fading, like a candle that melts on its own rather than being blown out by the wind. 1. Small populations, fragility woven into fate. The most important thing, almost all vanished human species had very small populations. Homo sapiens had an advantage. More partners for marriage, more exchange of knowledge. For small populations, everything is different. Climate shifts, a world changing faster than people could. The climate cooled, warmed, changed its humidity, turned forests into steppes and steppes back into forests. Especially the open landscapes of Europe. If one region collapsed, others might never come to help. The Flores and Luzon people relied on island environments. A climate shift or rising sea levels could isolate a population until it disappeared completely. Modern evidence does not support this. Unknown African lineages into some peoples of West and Central Africa. In our genes live fragments of dozens of peoples whose names we will never know. Which allows humans to survive in low oxygen environments, avoid hypoxia, and prevent excessive blood thickening at high elevations. This gene is almost completely absent. To live calmly at 4,000 meters is a gift from the Denisovans. And Aboriginal Australians, 4 to 6% of their DNA is Denisovan. Adaptation to hot climates. These populations carry the highest percentage of Denisovan ancestry in the world. And Mongolians, the percentage is lower, about 0.2 to 0.5%, but still influential. It includes TLR immune receptors and responses to certain pathogens. In terms of ancient human components, immune genes for resistance, keratin genes affecting hair and skin, that Europe adapted to cold, shifting environments. In some groups here, immunity adaptations to ancient, Near Eastern pathogens, genes affecting the skin barrier, metabolic traits supporting high-protein hunter diets. And Neanderthal genes here shape immune responses. Africa, almost no Neanderthal genes as expected. Neanderthals lived in Eurasia. Yet some West African groups show tiny traces of ancient back migration. When early sapiens returned to Africa, peoples of West, Central, and Southern Africa, branches that split off 1 to 1.5 million years ago, and with whom early sapiens later interbred. Their existence is recorded only as shadows in the genetic code. Our resilience to local infections, the way our immune system reacts to threats like malaria, even the deep genetic variability in the structures of the human brain. In many ways, I've called this the richest, the most ancient legacy of people who vanished long before us, people whose names we may never know, people whose bones science has not yet found, but their echoes live on. 4. The north of Eurasia and the Americas. The legacy of the night hunters, *** among indigenous Siberian groups, the Chukchi, the Yupik, the Aleuts. There remain gentle traces of ancient northern peoples. These were humans adapted to the cold, with bodies tuned to long winters, scarce sunlight, and a life that depended on fat, endurance, and silence. Their ancient genes changed the way fat is processed, helped the body stay warm in brutal climates, and allowed people to survive months of darkness with a steady, calm inner rhythm. Among Native American peoples, as much as 30 to 40% of their genome comes from a blend of early East Asian humans and the deep-rooted Northern Eurasians. Their heritage is one of the most intricate mosaics on Earth, a meeting of worlds long before maps existed. 5. Mind and behavior, what we inherited. And from whom, *** here, science whispers carefully. But even these cautious discoveries feel profound. From Neanderthals we carry fragments linked to synaptic plasticity, the flexibility of the brain as it learns. We also see influences on sleep, our internal clocks, our sensitivity to pain and alertness. From the Denisovans come traces that shaped the brainstem, altered how our neurons grow. Ancient adaptations in sensory processing. In perception, they left no faces behind, no tools we can clearly name. But their influence fills entire continents. The result: the vanished people are still here, inside us, when we look at modern humanity, from the fjords of Norway to the forests of Papua. From East Africa to the high plateaus of the Andes, we are not looking at a species born alone. We are looking at a tapestry, a mosaic of many lost peoples, a living library of their gifts. We are their continuation. We are their memory. Our bodies are their archive, our adaptations their final messages. And in that realization, there is something profoundly soft and deeply comforting. We were never alone. And even now, we are the last living branch of a vast and ancient family. Chapter 14: A world where we were not the only ones. And the quiet truth of how the others disappeared ***, if you imagine the Earth 40 to 50,000 years ago. It no longer feels empty or silent, not the way schoolbooks once described it. It was a world of many humanities. In Europe lived the Neanderthals, in Asia the Denisovans, on distant islands the small-bodied Flores people and the mysterious Luzon humans. Across Africa, ancient, unnamed species known only by the whispers of DNA. Homo sapiens was just one branch, among many, and yet today, on lui voit romain. Why we thus? Or did they simply fade away? These questions sound loud, but the answers are surprisingly gentle. There was no great war of species. No archaeological layer filled with slaughter. No weapons made specifically to fight other kinds of humans. Everything we know points to the opposite. Their disappearance took thousands of years, slow, soft, almost invisible, and most of them did not die out. They flowed into us, leaving pieces of themselves in our DNA or their conflicts. Yes, but small, rare. And never the story as a whole. The scientific picture here is quiet and simple. 1. Local conflicts were inevitable. Whenever two kinds of humans lived side by side, their paths sometimes crossed over hunting grounds, over a stream or a cave, over a shelter found at the wrong moment, or simply by accidental encounters in the wild silence of prehistoric nights. We do find a few Neanderthal skeletons bearing wounds that resemble spear strikes, but these are rare, isolated. Not the marks of armies or campaigns. Just the occasional spark of tension between small groups trying to survive. 2. There were no wars of species against species. Ancient populations were tiny. A whole community might have held only 20 to 40 adults. In such fragile groups, every loss was a tragedy. Every fight was a risk the entire lineage could feel. Everyone, Neanderthal, Denisovan, Early Sapien understood this in the work of survival. So aggression was episodic, local, unintentional. Never a strategy, no conquests, no extermination campaigns. Just the same pattern seen in modern small-scale hunter-gatherers. 3. And conflicts do not explain the disappearances. If Homo sapiens had systematically wiped out the others, Neanderthals would have vanished suddenly, but they faded over thousands of years. Denisovans would have disappeared only in certain regions, yet their genes stretch across all of Asia. Island humans would show evidence of violence. But their archaeological layers are calm, peaceful. The truth is gentler and sadder. Ancient humans did not fall to spears. They fell to time, to fragility, to the slow pressure of many small forces. Why did almost all of them disappear, except us? Research points to for quiet reasons. 1. Tiny populations. Neanderthals, Denisovans, the Flores Islanders all lived in small, scattered groups. Small populations can vanish even with no external threat. One bad winter, one failed generation, and a lineage can collapse. 2. Rapid climate swings. The ice ages shifted too quickly, reshaping habitats again and again. Island species were especially vulnerable. Mountain groups even more so. Nature changed faster than they could adapt. 3. Demographic fragility. The loss of just a couple of skilled hunters could doom a whole band. If two small groups lost contact, their shared bloodline simply ended. 4. The arrival of Homo sapiens, not as a destroyer, but as a more adaptable system. Sapiens were more numerous, more mobile, better connected. They exchanged knowledge faster, formed wider social networks, adapted to new climates with ease. It wasn't a war. It was the quiet spread of a species that grew faster, like a tree that slowly takes more sunlight and naturally replaces another, without ever intending harm. Blending, not violence, was the main form of contact. The most beautiful truth is this: Homo sapiens did not simply push the others aside. We merged with them. Europe carries Neanderthal stories in its blood. Asia holds Denisovan traces. Africa contains the oldest, most mysterious lineages of all. The Americas carry the blended legacy of ancient hunters of the North. They did not disappear. They became part of us. Today l'Homo sapiens but insidieux. Live the memories of all the others. We are the descendants of Neanderthal storytellers who once whispered by the fire. We are the heirs of Denisovan hunters who knew the breath of thin mountain air. We are distant relatives of the tiny Flores people and carriers of the oldest African signatures ever written into a human body. We are the continuation of many lost families. And when we fall asleep, there is a deep and peaceful comfort in knowing we did not arrive on an empty earth. We came to a world where others had lived before us, and they did not vanish without a trace. They remain in our breath, our immunity, our metabolism, the memory etched into our cells. We are their last branch, their quiet conclusion, their continuation. Sleep well. We are not the lonely children of evolution, but the final chapter of an ancient, enormous family.